Thanks for watching Severe Thunderstorm Outlooks. We've got some important changes to the outlooks over the next couple of days. We've added a new day, taken a finer grain look at what the actual threats are. They've moved around a little bit, gotten a little worse in some areas. I'm meteorologist Ted Keller. Let's dive in. Lower 48 here on this Sunday around noon, looking at the visible satellite loop, seeing a moisture area coming up from Texas into the mid-Missouri River Valley. We also see hints that another just storm system is coming ashore here. You can see by the swirl on the cirrus clouds here, but certainly the circulation that shows up there. Let's take a look at the 500 millibar chart, and sure enough, there is a closed-off low off the north coast of California. We have little disturbances. It's really interesting, just kind of flowing through. There's a little one there. There's a little one there. They're all over the place, really. And that is what's going to be interesting about severe weather for the next couple of days, to be honest, is trying to figure out where the ideal conditions are versus where the, on the one hand, you have unstable air. On the other hand, do you have enough wind shear to hold everything together? And how are those two overlapping or crossing, or what's the timing of all that? That's just really going to be the challenge of the next several days. Let's start with today. I include this larger look because there are some marginal risks for severe weather out through Idaho, Montana, parts of Utah, Wyoming, northern Minnesota. But certainly down here is, I think, where the bulk of the activity is going to occur. And if we zoom in on that area, we'll see that there is a slight risk of severe weather from Dallas, basically due westward along the interstate there, not quite getting to Midland, Odessa, but all points south, including Austin and San Antonio. San Angelo is in there. And the level 1, which is the marginal, goes all the way up to Wichita. So there is a tornado risk with this, and this is the latest data. This is a 2% risk that covers a pretty broad area, mostly contained, not, so it kind of leaks out of the slight risk area, actually, a little bit up into Wichita. So they're acknowledging that there could be a supercell that latches onto a boundary, or something up here could produce a tornado in theory, although it's the lowest probability you can issue. It looks like maybe the main money later on today, if we can get things focused, might be down here, but we'll see. Let's take a look at the hail risk. Hail defined as 1 inch or greater in diameter, so Dallas, and again, points south and southwestward, and again, including Austin and San Antonio, and about the same wind risk, except not quite as far to the north. If we take a look at CSU's 3-panel, so tornado risks are actually produced at their highest level up here in the UP of Michigan. I find that a little improbable, but nevertheless, there it is. That's a 5% risk. Hail, about the same threat up there. Wind, about the same threat up there. But you'll notice that tornado kind of dribbles on down through parts of western Missouri and Arkansas, eastern Kansas. So this is one of those situations where it's a highly conditional sort of thing. If you can get a patch of sunlight, if you can get an upper level weak disturbance, a lot of things have to come together to get a supercell together, and then it has to have the right low level winds to get a tornado together. So it'll be worth watching. Now, Nadocast, this is another machine learning model, doesn't put anything really of any substance much further than Fort Smith, and that's pretty weak. But down here in Texas, there is a 2%. That's 2%. That's right, and there's even in Mexico here 2 to 3% chance, but not much else beyond that. Let's take a look at the instability parameters. They look pretty good. And this is where a little bit of mismatch occurs. This is interesting because at 6 p.m. tonight, the HRRR has a pretty broad stroke of unstable air. This would be enough to support thunderstorms for sure. But what about supercell? Again, very conditional. Like, if you'll remember, the marginal risk is up in this area, up to Wichita. This right here is the big question mark, I think. A little more substantive chances down here. Now, if you overlay that, I wish I could overlay them, but just kind of take a snapshot of that. And I can tell you right now, the bulk shear is going to be about right here. So let's see if that matches up. Yeah, right about here. So I think there's an overlap here where the glue, if you will, that holds supercell together, and you really want that to be about 30 knots or higher. So right there on the scale, when you start seeing these light blues, and especially better if you have the purple colors, that gets into the 50s, that's enough to hold the structure of a thunderstorm together to be able to make it a supercell in the first place. Now here is the HRRR. There are thunderstorms being printed out. I don't see any updraft velocities greater than 75 in any of that, but again, all it takes is one or two storms to get a root somewhere to be able to produce that type of activity, either sustained severe weather, hail, and large winds, or possibly a tornado. Let's look ahead to Monday now. This is an interesting bimodal day, as they say, where it splits in two, where there are two threat areas, one from Oklahoma City southward into Texas. The other one includes cities like Minneapolis, over to Milwaukee. Madison, Wisconsin is included in that. Cedar Rapids, almost. Mason City, Iowa, places like that. Rochester are all in that level 2 for tomorrow. And then if we look at how the tornado risk breaks down, there is a slight one, a 2% risk in that southwestern zone area. But up here, from Rochester, Minnesota, straight over through La Crosse and over to Madison, in that area, there's actually a 5% tornado risk for Monday. CSU agrees with that tornado assessment, bumping it up to 10 in almost that exact same area. La Crosse over to south central parts of Wisconsin for Monday. Hail risk is at its maximum, almost in the exact same area. Wind risk is you can tell by looking at that, it's meant to be a later at night event once this kind of forms into a squall line and becomes a damaging wind threat. So as a storm chaser, I'm looking at this and trying to figure out if I should go directly to that epicenter or take a risk a little bit more back to the west along the very weak and possibly non-playing low pressure area. We'll see if that even is a thing. Let's take a look at the 500 millibar flow on Monday. And it's interesting because we just have the main disturbances here with the strongest winds wrapping around the base of that in Southern California and Arizona. But we have these little tiny short waves that are just kind of hard to pick out. That's an even smaller one. Here's another one here. And each of these could be a little bit more than what it's shown here or less. If it's a little bit more, it would be enough to fire something, substantive down in this area, certainly, if the timing is right. And then up in this area, again, is kind of a mystery. If we take a look at unstable air on Monday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we got some pretty good instability in Texas and along the boundary here in Kansas, although this area here is really not being described by the SPC at all. Now, I'll tell you one overall factor that's not included in this, and I'll let you know what it is. All this area is mildly capped, meaning updrafts would have to overcome a little bit of warm air aloft in order to get to the level of free convection and form a thunderstorm. Well, under more dynamic conditions, the caps I'm seeing could probably be broken, but because we don't have any strong surface features or low pressure areas, it's going to be tougher to break through even a marginal cap. Some severe weather people will tell you that a weak cap is actually good because it kind of holds the energy in for longer. And that's fine, but if you never have enough to overcome that cap, then nothing happens. And literally, when you look at the model data and you look at the radar reflectivity projections for this time, there really isn't anything forming in here. So that it's picking up on that cap big time. So we'll see what happens. Now, let's look at Tuesday's really, really long area here from southern Michigan straight through Chicago, Des Moines, Kansas City, Oklahoma City, all in the level 2 out of 5 slight risk for Tuesday with a level 1 surrounding that. Take a look at CSU's breakdown. They have a tornado risk, an elongated one from northern Missouri through the Chicago area. In fact, the maximum is the dot is put right on Chicagoland over into southern Michigan as well, with a pretty high hail risk in about that same area, but that trails all the way down to northern Oklahoma. And the wind risk, again, indicative of a line of storms that eventually forms and becomes a greater wind risk in that respect. That's Tuesday. So let's take a look at the 500 millibar flow. Now this, remember the strongest winds were down here the day before. Now they're here. This represents a lot more meaty situations. There's a lot more bulk shear here. So there's a lot more to support a supercell, but then we have to start talking about what modes, because when we have a trough that's tilted like this back to the southwest, it's not real favorable for letting areas of low pressure to develop, or at least not substantial ones, which would allow the low-level winds to kick in a right way that would support not just a supercell, but a tornadic one, and also it would support discrete supercells as opposed to lines just forming. Now, to be clear, the tornado threat doesn't, if you were looking at this wondering what your tornado threat is, you don't care if it's a line or a single supercell. But people who chase storms and look at that, actually the isolated ones might be slightly easier to detect anymore. I don't know if that's the case. Anyway, this implies more linear formations, but a lot of times in these situations, you can have individual supercells start out for long enough to produce something, and then they become a line very quickly. Anyway, on Wednesday, the threat continues from Madison, Wisconsin, straight through western Illinois, encompassing almost all of Missouri except the southeast and the extreme northwest, clipping north Arkansas, northwest Arkansas, eastern Oklahoma, all the way down to Dallas. So Dallas and Tulsa and Springfield, Missouri, where I live, in this, Kansas City, Davenport, Iowa, and this is in this, Quincy, up to Madison, Wisconsin. Chicago is just on the edge of this. Rockford, Illinois is in this. And so anyway, that's for Wednesday. If we look at the CSU Outlook, this is what I just showed you, and this is what it is saying. It isn't as excited about thunderstorm production here, and so we'll see how that pans out. This would suggest that maybe not all this area is going to see thunderstorms, and indeed that will be the problem with all these outlooks. What's the coverage going to be? It's an interesting question. On Wednesday, the EPS mean, now we're looking at a different model. Does show, again, a positively tilted trough, but lots of energy involved with this. So right there, if you overlap that with unstable air, which will be plentiful in this area, that's something to be concerned about. SPC has not pulled anything for Thursday, but this is where they sink the risk down to Ohio Valley, down through Arkansas, maybe a maximum there just south of Wichita Falls. And then we skip ahead to Friday. This is new now. They pulled the trigger on a 15% chance for Friday. That, again, is covering very familiar territory. So Des Moines and Kansas City, Wichita, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, all more or less in the center of that risk area. And this is the way CSU's learning machine sees it. That's the SPC forecast. And this one is maybe a little bit more off to the east. And on Friday's jet stream, another core comes ashore, if you will. So that's what's causing all this. So there's a greater upper level presence here. And while this is a little bit positively tilted, it's pretty close to being neutral. So I think this might actually support cyclogenesis at the surface and get the low level winds a hand in this game, because they really haven't had much here from a lot of these other outlooks. Let's take a look finally at the NIU outlook for the next 7 days. Yep, pretty much sums up what we just talked about. High probabilities. Week after that, the 19th through the 25th, you can kind of see by the pattern that some sort of cool air, stable air kind of sags its way into this area, but it stays pretty active from the Ohio River Valley down through Oklahoma and down through West Texas. And then to finish out April, this has been very consistent, even into early May. Supercell indices are running very high for that period for what would be considered the prime area. I do not say anything related to the word tornado and followed by an A. I hate that term. Anyway, that's the outlook for today. We'll bring you another one tomorrow. Thanks for watching today's edition of Severe Thunderstorm Outlooks. This is published every day after the morning Storm Prediction Center update. Also, remember to check that site off on day one because they update it fairly frequently. If you like this video, please like it. Also, you can subscribe to the channel for more content just like this.